There's a part of my school no one talks about. It's an old wing, long abandoned, sitting at the very back of the campus like a wound that never healed. They say it was built decades ago, back when the school first opened, but something happened, and they sealed it off. Most students don't even know it exists because you can't see it from anywhere on campus unless you look hard enough. But I knew about it. And after what happened, I wish I didn't. It started one night when I stayed late to work on a project. The rest of the school was eerily quiet, with just a few dim lights illuminating the hallways. My friend Lucas was supposed to be with me, but he had left his laptop charger in one of the classrooms. I waited, tapping my foot impatiently, until he finally came back, looking a little pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. That I laughed it off, thinking he was trying to spook me. But his face didn't change. It was a whispering sound, like someone calling my name, he said, staring at the ground, almost embarrassed. I could see goosebumps on his arms. "Maybe it's just the janitor or something," I replied, shrugging it off. But as we made our way back down the hall, I started to feel it too. The air felt heavier, colder somehow, like we weren't supposed to be there. And then I heard it, faint but clear, like someone breathing out a word just behind my ear. "Come." I froze and looked at Lucas. He had gone pale, his eyes wide as he whispered, "Did you hear that too?" We both looked around, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. I don't know why, but something made me look towards the far end of the hallway. That's when I noticed the door, the one I'd never seen before. It was slightly ajar, just a crack, leading into the forgotten wing. Lucas shook his head, pulling at my arm. "Let's go back. This doesn't feel right." But the voice, it wasn't calling to us anymore, it was practically begging. I took a step forward, feeling as if my feet were moving without my consent. That we peered inside, expecting darkness, but we found the opposite. A dim, flickering light illuminated the hall, casting eerie shadows on the cracked walls. It looked as if the place had been frozen in time, like a snapshot of a nightmare from decades ago. That we hesitated, but curiosity won over fear. We crept in slowly, our footsteps echoing unnaturally. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but it was the silence that made it unbearable. Every step sounded like thunder in that suffocating quiet. The first room we passed was an old classroom. Desks and chairs were still lined up neatly, but each one had something carved into it. I leaned closer, my heart pounding, and saw names, hundreds of names. They were etched deep into the wood, all scratched out as if someone had tried to erase them, but their traces lingered, haunting. "Lucas, let's get out of here," I whispered, the unease growing in my chest. But Lucas had walked further down the hall, staring at a bulletin board filled with dusty, yellowed papers. He seemed entranced, his fingers trembling as he reached out to touch one of the papers. "Do you know any of these names?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. That I leaned in to look at the list. The names were old, most of them faded and smudged, but there were a few that looked disturbingly familiar. My breath hitched as I recognized one. My name, there it was, clear as day, written on a faded piece of paper, next to Lucas's. That we stumbled back, feeling like we had been punched in the gut. Just then, I heard footsteps echoing down the hall. Slow, steady, deliberate. The sound grew louder, closer, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. Just empty darkness. "Who's there?" Lucas shouted, but his voice came out shaky. And then we saw it, a shadow, long and thin, stretching down the hall toward us. It didn't have a body, just the silhouette of someone standing, someone impossibly tall. It began to move, gliding soundlessly toward us, and in that moment, I swear I felt it staring into me. We bolted, sprinting down the hallway, but it seemed endless, stretching further and further with each step. My lungs burned as I gasped for breath, and Lucas stumbled beside me, his face twisted in terror. Just when I thought we couldn't go on, we burst through a doorway and into the familiar hallway of the school. We turned back, but the door we had come from was gone. Just a blank wall. We pounded on it, yelling, trying to make sense of what we had seen. The janitor found us minutes later, trembling and pale. We tried to tell him, but he just shook his head, his eyes darkening. "You two shouldn't have gone there," he murmured, more to himself than to us. That wing, it's not meant for the living. The next morning, I returned to the hallway, trying to convince myself it had all been a nightmare. But when I checked the wall, it was blank. No door, no entry, nothing. Lucas wouldn't speak to me after that, and a week later, he transferred schools without any explanation. Sometimes, though, I still hear whispers when I'm alone, calling my name, beckoning from somewhere deep within the walls. And every now and then, when I pass that blank wall, I feel a strange pull, like something is waiting just beyond the surface, watching and waiting for me to come back. After Lucas transferred, things only got worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that hallway was waiting for me. Every time I passed that blank wall, I'd feel that strange pull, that dark whisper at the back of my mind, begging me to come closer. The worst part was that the whispers seemed to be getting louder. I'd hear them in the quiet moments, when no one else was around, murmuring my name, like a chant that wouldn't stop. One evening, a few weeks later, I was staying late again, this time for a group project with some classmates. I tried not to think about the last time I'd stayed late at school, but the memories crept in anyway, making my skin prickle. Just as we were about to wrap up, one of my classmates, Sarah, asked if I could grab a folder she'd left in her locker. Her locker was right next to that cursed hallway. With a growing sense of dread, I walked over, trying not to look at the wall where the door had been. But as I approached, a flickering light caught my eye. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding. There, just like before, was the door, ajar, leading into the forgotten wing. That it wasn't possible. I had seen it vanish. I had touched that wall, felt its solid, blank surface. But there it was again, almost inviting me in. A voice in my head screamed to run, but my feet didn't listen. It was as if something had taken control, pulling me closer. Before I realized it, I was standing in front of the door. I didn't remember making the choice to open it, but suddenly, I was on the other side, standing in that dim, frozen hallway once more. The eerie silence pressed down on me, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The whispers had returned, louder, filling my ears with an unending chorus of voices, each one chanting my name. And then, through the whispers, I heard something different. It was a laugh, low and chilling, echoing down the hallway. I turned, my body stiff with fear, and saw a shadow slithering across the walls. It moved like smoke, changing shape as it came closer, inching toward me. Panicked, I stumbled backward, trying to find the door, but it was gone. Only a blank wall remained behind me. I clawed at it, tears streaming down my face, my hands desperately searching for any sign of an escape. The laughter grew louder, until it was all I could hear. Then, I heard my own voice. It was like listening to a distorted recording, but unmistakably me. The shadow spoke in my voice, saying the same words I had whispered in fear that night with Lucas. "Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here." But it was mocking me, twisting my words into something unrecognizable. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow loomed closer until it was inches from my face, and I saw something within it. Faces, hundreds of them, pressed against the dark mist. They were the names carved into those desks, the names on that bulletin board. They stared at me with hollow eyes, mouths stretched open in silent screams. I could feel their despair, their terror, pressing into my mind, drowning me in a sea of fear. Then I saw him. Lucas's face, twisted in horror, appeared in the mist. His eyes locked onto mine, pleading, as if reaching out for help I could never give him. He mouthed a single word, "Run," and suddenly, I was free. The whispers stopped, the laughter faded, and I stumbled backward, finding myself back in the familiar hallway. The cursed door was gone, replaced by that empty wall once again. My heart pounded in my chest as I gasped for breath, feeling the sting of reality settle over me. That I never told anyone what happened that night. I'd see Lucas's name pop up on social media occasionally, but he never responded to any messages. It was as if he had disappeared, existing only as a face in that dark mist, trapped forever. I moved schools the next year. But even now, sometimes, I'll hear that whisper, faint and barely audible, calling my name, reminding me of that door and the voices waiting behind it. and I can never shake the feeling that one day, I'll open a door and find myself back in that hallway. The hallway that's been waiting, for me.